Hey friends, I'm Christy, and you're listening to Rock the Damn Boat. If you've ever bitten your tongue to keep the peace or said yes when every part of you wanted to say no, this one's for you. We're diving into the messy, real stuff that people pleasers like me have spent years avoiding. It's time to have the hard conversations, shake things up, and learn to stand tall even when it makes waves. And my May conversations here on the podcast are all represent chapters of my life. And if you listened to last week's episode with Danny Carr, she is a sober coach out of Australia. She is starting to really lean into, or has been leaning into, the yoga and mindfulness space, much like I did in my sobriety. Her and I have very close dates. And we talked about everything related to this sober lifestyle and the gifts of it. And I hope you'll go back and listen to that episode from last week. The rest of May, I'll be speaking to someone who is in animal advocacy, and my journey with PetSmart and launching me into the pet industry all stemmed from pet rescue. And so I'm excited to have that conversation with Lori. And then my dear friend Becky is a nonprofit consultant, and she was also a yoga teacher at my studio. And it's so funny because in that episode, we really don't talk about yoga, but I'm grateful to have her in my life. My friend Nicole is coming on the show soon, and we'll be talking about, Reiki and all the mindfulness and wellness activities that we use in our journey of both coaching and our own personal life. It's been exciting, this podcast journey. I've been doing it for over 6 months now, and I don't know how much longer I will continue to do the interviews. They are rewarding and also a huge time commitment. And most of my listeners love the Sunday shorties, which are also really tracking on YouTube. If you did not know that I film all of these, you can also go watch on YouTube. So I am recording this here on May 12th of 2026. Yes. And today is 8 years sober. I stopped drinking on May 12th, 2018. And today's episode, I'm just going to share a little bit about my story again. When I reflect over this past year, I think it's been such a challenging year for a lot of reasons, and it almost felt like my year one. I wanted to share it for anyone who is newly sober and maybe feeling a little strange and ready to throw in the towel. I do also want to point out that this menopausal year has rocked me and forced me to really implement some of those early tools. I went on a beautiful walk this morning, and I have been doing a lot to keep myself calm and relaxed. And we use the word regulated a lot these days. We talk about nervous system regulation, and there was a time where that was just called being relaxed. And I've been trying to keep myself in more of a state of relaxation lately because there's a lot of noise in this world. And I have been on an entrepreneurial journey for 6 months now, and I feel like I'm constantly outputting. You are creating content, you are following up with people. It's a lot of outreach, it's a lot of cold calling. It is not what I am designed to do. So that is part of the reason. I know I dropped a little bombshell on Sunday's episode about going back to corporate, and I think that's what I need for my nervous system. And I'm doing things differently this time, and I have a lot of agency over who I reach out to, who I apply with, what I do. But I am not comfortable with the level of output that it requires to be an entrepreneur. And that's been a great sense of awareness for me. And as someone who is sober, post-menopausal, and neurodivergent, I have to look out for myself first. I am still going to encourage you to rock the damn boat in any way that you see fit. Maybe that's leaving corporate, maybe that's getting sober, maybe that's finally, speaking your mind to someone that you've been biting your tongue around for years. Maybe that's setting boundaries with family members. Whatever that is, I still want you to be brave in your life. And courage and compassion are still two key pillars for me. It is what my new Thrive Collective is founded on. So I am putting together a membership of women who want to unite and talk about things like midlife pivots and what they might pursue to give them more purpose in life. I'm a firm believer that when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. And if I am that teacher for a certain amount of people, then I welcome that opportunity to lead inside the Thrive Collective, which is on Circle. And that is my only little sales pitch for that. You can learn more at thrivewithchristy.com. You do not have to be sober to be in the membership, but if you have thoughts or questions about sobriety, I am always here to answer. And talking a little bit more about my journey today as I'm celebrating 8 years, I wanted to reflect on this past year. And I was looking back at social media and all of the different, so every year I've documented, year one, year two, year three. Last year I had a little candle at the studio and it was a 7 and I lit the candle. And so it was 7 years. And today I was holding up the number 8 on social media. It has been a really challenging year. And this time last year, when I was celebrating year 7, many of you know that I had just stopped using birth control. I had had my IUD removed prior to my 50th birthday in June of last year because I wanted to see where I was at in this journey. And it's so interesting because I just started listening to the new Menopause book on Audible. And she did the same thing at 48. And I'm going to get her name wrong, but it's Dr. Mary Claire Haver, who I always see on social media. So I thought it was interesting that she did the same thing at age 48. Like she was going to figure out where she was in her journey. And she started to have serious symptoms, just like I did. I had heard about the Marina crash, and I thought that's what I was experiencing, that it would eventually level off. And it didn't, it just got worse. Over the summer, I was easily agitated. I was incredibly impulsive. We were going to sell the place in Hamilton and then we weren't, and then we were, and then we weren't. And then I was going to move, I was going to buy a place in Heiko that we could rent out to someone. And then eventually we could move to Heiko. And I had all these plans and things happening that were heightening my irritability, my emotional state. And it was starting to affect my work. And I knew, my boss talked to me about something that I had fallen behind on, and I used to never have to be reminded to do anything. I was always a step ahead, turning things in on time, if not early. I worked well under pressure, which I now know to be an ADHD trait, but I was always on top of things. And that started early on. I took AP classes in high school. I graduated top 10% of my class. It wasn't until college when I had to study on my own that I started really struggling with classes. And at that same time, I started drinking to cope. I was a blackout drinker as early as college. And this past year, having 7 years of sobriety under my belt meant that I did not feel like taking a drink. So never did it enter my mind that I might want to drink to deal with what was happening. Now, that had been part of my journey earlier on when I was trying to get sober and I was white knuckling. And I remember talking to somebody at work and forgetting my train of thought mid sentence. And it was shameful and it was embarrassing. And I thought, if I'm having this kind of anxiety, like, then I'm going to keep drinking. And that's what happened then. But now, of course, I did 12 step for the first several years sober, and then I was in a different creative women's group. So I've had different groups that I've been a part of. I have not gone to meetings in probably about 3 years, and some of you might be cringing if you are part of a recovery community and you go to meetings regularly, you know how important they are. And I I I did have my yoga practice. And I think that while that might not substitute for recovery meetings for people who believe in the power of regular meetings, that it did connect me spiritually. So I had this level of spirituality. I had my online yoga community that I was a part of. There were some of us within that community that were a kind of a subset of that group that were all sober. We were sources of support for one another. And it definitely was plugged into the sober community the whole time. But last year, when I started going through menopause, I didn't know what was happening. And I didn't have anyone to talk to because I didn't recognize it for what it was. And from the outside looking in, people thought it was stress. And it's not to say that I wasn't stressed. Yes, I had a lot on my plate. I had the yoga studio. I was winding down the boutique, but like over the summer, I still had that going on. I had my full-time job. And I remember telling everyone that I was busy in a good way. Like everything I did brought me purpose. And while that was true, my brain was changing and I couldn't keep up with all of those things as well as I had been able to. And we were starting to talk about perimenopause last year and that, okay, this is brain fog, this is forgetfulness. But it got to the point where I would take the trash out and hours later walk back in and the trash bin was still open without a liner in it. I would put laundry in the washing machine and leave it overnight, or I would put it in the dryer and forget all about it. And those might seem like little things, but they were really starting to add up. And they were also contributing to me feeling like I was crazy, like I couldn't concentrate on any one thing. And I was managing a team and I couldn't remember things that we talked about in our weekly discussions. I was dropping the ball on so many things, and I knew that something had to give. And they talked to me at work about these things, about some time I was taking off. And I knew I was taking off more time because I needed that mental break, but I really didn't know why. I thought that I was just at maybe a breaking point in my career. And the reason I bring that up as it relates to sobriety is because alcohol had been a coping mechanism for so long. And when I removed that from my life, I came up with plenty of other healthy things: yoga, being outside in nature, meditation, breath work, mindfulness, petting the cats, riding the horse. There are different things that I was doing. But at the point menopause was at its peak and that my hormones were absolutely in a drought, I couldn't really see the forest for the trees. And this is where neurodivergence comes in. And I feel like there's been this trifecta over the past year of being sober and not using unhealthy coping mechanisms, which is not a bad thing at all, but there's sobriety in the mix. There is menopause in the mix, and then there is neurodivergence in the mix. And I had been diagnosed with anxiety 10 years ago. When I went to my GP and told her that I wanted to stop drinking, and this was around age 42. So we were back in Texas. I wanted to stop drinking, but I didn't see that as a possibility. So I was like, maybe I can cut back. And the GP put me on anxiety medication because she thought, well, we've been treating depression this whole time. Alcohol is a depressant. Taking antidepressants for most of my adult life because I was drinking a depressant. nonstop. So no wonder. I only had one doctor in my entire adulthood that suggested I stop drinking as a means to help my depression. So I finally get this GP who wants to treat the anxiety. I go this past January, I get a full workup, an assessment, and I get diagnosed not only with generalized anxiety disorder, but also ADHD. Now, ADHD is self reported. So you answer all of these questions and you rank them on a scale. And of course, I was off the charts on some of the questions around focus and concentration. And it could be said that those were also menopausal symptoms. However, I can look back and see things like rejection sensitivity and being very reactive. I was thinking today about how I used to, when boys would tease me on the playground at school, I would grab them and dig my fingernails in. And that's even in one of my yearbooks about like, oh, Ms. Nails. And if Andy is listening to this podcast episode, then I'm sorry for the amount of times that I clawed you. And that was my reaction. I mean, granted, it felt like bullying because these boys were calling me names or making fun of me or whatever was happening on the playground, but that was my response, was to literally fight back with my fingernails. I had this like rage throughout my life, and alcohol just helped tamp everything down. Only my problem was there was no off switch. I would drink to the point of being completely blacked out and not remembering. It would be interesting, and I don't think there are any studies, and I would be curious to know about this, but blackout drinking, I would have to think, has long-term effects on your brain. And I don't know what the mechanism behind blackouts are. I don't even know that that is proven in any way. Like your short-term memory sort of goes offline, but you're still functioning. So people would think I was still fine and I'd operate that way for hours, like at the bar or at a party and not remember anything. So whether or not that had more of an impact on how my brain was functioning in perimenopause and menopause, I don't know. But what I do know is this: we are absolutely starting to talk about perimenopause and menopause. There are women like Dr. Mary Claire Haver and Ashley Auth, who I had on the podcast, my friend Erica, people who are talking about hormones and hormone health, what we can do to support ourselves during this journey. But if you are neurodivergent and going through menopause, which is your last 12 months of having a cycle, your hormones are all over the place, it is changing who you are dramatically. Because when those hormones drop, when estrogen drops, diminishes the production of other things like oxytocin, like dopamine, like serotonin, which is the calming hormone. I was not fully aware of that part of it, like the serotonin part of it, until just this past week because I'm reading The Rushing Woman's Syndrome by Dr. Libby Weaver, and she talked about serotonin and how it's the calming hormone. And if you think about antidepressants, most of the time they're in the SSRI category, which is selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. And the inhibiting factor in that medication is that it allows more serotonin to sort of swirl through your brain. I am saying this in like the most layman terms there are. So it allows the serotonin to work its magic as opposed to being depleted. I'm not a neuroscientist. I am not a therapist. I'm none of the above. I am just a woman who spent the last year of her life thinking that she was bonkers. And that was not like me. If you've been on the first 7 years of my sobriety journey, now the first year was hard. And I always tell people that this last year of sobriety and my corporate exit has felt like as big of an identity shift as quitting drinking because I literally walked away from something that, had done for so many decades, just like drinking. And so I kept telling myself, okay, well, if I can get through this first year of being out of corporate, then it'll be like my first year of sobriety. And then I will hit this magic. Because if you think about pregnancy being 9 months, there's kind of a funny thing in recovery around like, oh, the 9 month mark. It's like you've birthed a new you. And so it starts to feel a little bit easier. And then at the year mark, you're like, okay, I've done it for a year. I can keep going. And for me, it just kept getting easier. But this past year has really thrown me for a loop because my brain chemistry had normalized to sober life. And so everything that I did in my first year of sobriety to rewire my brain, to stop reaching for alcohol as a coping mechanism, to learn to operate at a more regulated state and not get so angry and have a larger window of tolerance and let go of things like control and expectations. I had spent the last 7 years rewiring my brain. And then in year 8, menopause changed everything. And if you are a woman who is sober, newly sober, not so newly sober, and you are neurodivergent, maybe you're ADHD, maybe you have anxiety, maybe you've suffered off and on from depression, and you are entering menopause or you are starting to have the signs of perimenopause and you feel different, like you're not in control of your mind, like nothing that you did before works anymore. None of your tools work. Your motivation to implement said tools no longer works. You are not alone. And that is where I wish I had known that it wasn't just stress. I would have started hormone replacement therapy a lot earlier. And granted, hormone replacement therapy is just now starting to be something that we're talking about. Before, it was just the pellets, the bioidentical pellets, and not everyone wants to have the pellets inserted into, under their skin. And I was one of them. I couldn't see myself doing that. So now that there are so many other hormone replacement options, I probably would have started that a little bit sooner. I can tell you without a doubt that I would not have gone off of my SSRI, which I did because I thought that by leaving the stress of a corporate job, that I would be able to go off of my SSRI. I knew it wasn't working because I had been taking it for 3 years and suddenly, like over the summer, I couldn't finish a thought. I couldn't remember a damn thing. I was no longer motivated. I was angry at my husband all the time. I was angry about life. And I felt so lost that I was like, well, if this isn't working, I'm not going to take a medication just to be taking a medication. Let's just see what a new baseline looks like. It wasn't great. I started with the new doctor. I started a new SSRI. I started a different format for HRT. And if you've been listening to the podcast for any length of time, then in January I hit rock bottom. And I was in a really dark place. And I went and had a full mental health workup. I scored very high on IQ and cognitive function. So it wasn't that I couldn't think clearly. Anxiety was the diagnosis, along with ADHD. I'm just now here on, May 12th, starting to feel normal again because I started working with Hormones by Design out of Waco. They have clinics all over Texas. And if you are in Florida and you're lucky enough to use my friend Ashley, there's also, I think there's Heather Hirsch is a doctor who I believe is licensed in many states. There are apps like Winona and MIDI Health, which of course MIDI Health is being represented by all sorts of celebrities now. So they will pair you with a doctor that you can have an online visit with in your state. That is my complaint about Winona is everything is done through the app and you don't actually talk to anybody. They don't even do labs. So I caution against Winona. It's not very personal. And from what I understand about MIDI, actually have a meeting with a doctor and they will go over your lab results with you. I love Hormones by Design for that reason. I had a 47-minute conversation with my new nurse practitioner, and we went over everything. She did not dismiss my symptoms. We talked about even when I was a teenager, when I very first started drinking, it was to quiet these dark thoughts I was having during that time in my life. So she said, "Wow, you are really sensitive to hormones." Not only did I have this big shift in my mood and thoughts as a teenager, but then I had them again as the hormones exited. Now I am left with learning how to manage ADHD like symptoms. I may or may not end up trying a stimulant. I feel like the HRT, now that that's starting to get under control and having gone back to the SSRI that was helping me before, I am starting to feel like myself again. I am feeling so much better headed into this ninth year of sobriety. I have been noting times of recovery meetings. There are several different options out there. So if you are in 12 step, I applaud you. I think it's a great program. There is not any particular reason I left other than the pandemic. And then we moved. And I know I could join meetings online, but I was very involved with yoga as my support and my spirituality. There is She Recovers. So if you are someone who's recovering from an eating disorder or maybe workaholism or abuse, She Recovers is a great program for anybody identifies as female or non-binary and needs a recovery meeting. They do trauma-informed yoga on Wednesdays. There's the Luckiest Club for sobriety, so that's a paid membership from what I understand. Those are options if you are like me and on a sobriety journey. If you are in the midst of menopause and you feel like you are completely not in control of your brain, I encourage you to seek support for that. And if your GP is not knowledgeable enough on hormonal health, then consider a cash pay clinic like Hormones by Design, like MIDI Health. And if you are neurodivergent, you are not alone. And we're all just doing the best we can. And, I want you to be your most authentic self. And if that means rocking the damn boat, then I want you to do that too. I am grateful for this 8th year of sobriety because I'm grateful I stayed sober through all of these changes. I have had friends lean in at times where I didn't necessarily want the help or I was afraid to accept it. It felt like I was being a bother. And I wasn't. Seems like nobody talks on the phone anymore, but I had friends calling me to check on me, encouraging me to reach out if I needed it. I have a very patient husband who has been not the most supportive of my corporate exit, but certainly being patient as it relates to me being completely Jekyll and Hyde over the past year. I have at the Neuro Magic Club. Amy is a coach out of the UK. But if you are interested in it, the meetings are at 7 a.m. Central. So if you are maybe in the Central or Eastern time zone, might be something you want to check out. I'm happy to share a link. But I join up with those ladies and we talk about, our ADHD behaviors. And like I said, when I look back on my life, I can see that it was there. I can see the rejection sensitivity. I can see how focus that was required in college was not available to me, and my studying habits and way I learned probably should have changed, but I didn't know that at the time. I am aware that my drinking was a coping mechanism for anxiety, which was probably also related to ADHD and that rejection sensitivity. I'm seeing it now here, celebrating 8 years sober, that um, sobriety and menopause and being a little neurospicy have been an interesting combination over the past year. 2025 threw me a lot of curveballs. I know we all talked about it being the year of the snake and what we were going to shed. And I shed a corporate identity, I shed a yoga studio owner identity. And here we are trying to embrace the fire horse. But I got to tell you, I am embracing slower things. I am going to stop spinning so many plates. I am likely winding down the interview portion of the podcast, and we'll hopefully continue to bring you Sunday shorties. I really enjoy this format, but the interviews are a lot of work. If I am juggling sobriety, menopause, and neurodivergence, then I do not need to pile it on. And I've always enjoyed a challenge, but I think that growing the community, the Thrive Collective, is the most important path forward for me. Having a community, growing a community has been on my heart for 6 months, ever since I left corporate and I was afraid to start it. But you know what? I've tried a lot of other things and nothing has my heart like this does. And it feels a little bit like having an online yoga studio because we'll have live yoga classes. I get to teach women the way I wanted to coach. And so it's all under one membership. That's what I'm looking forward to uh, in the months and years to come. I hope you have a great rest of your week. I hope that if you need sober resources or menopausal or neurodivergent support, that you are finding it. And if you aren't, please reach out and I will help point you in plenty of directions. Thank you so much for listening, and we will talk again soon.
You've been listening to Rock the Damn Boat, a podcast produced and recorded by Christy Hughes. You can follow, subscribe on both Apple and Spotify, and your 5-star review goes a long way. Thank you so much for your support of the show.